Welcome to the Storyfield. This is a podcast created and sponsored by the Allen Firm. This is Josh Allen, and I'm joined by Micah Petrie. I think you'll agree that life is complex, business is hard, and living a life of faith can feel complicated. We know it's discouraging when movement in your life or business or faith has stopped. Well, you're in the right place to hear some great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you to move forward in life. So thank you for joining us today. We know you're going to be encouraged. Okay, Storyfield listeners, today we have a really special show. I'm really honored today to have my father, Scott Allen, on the show. So this is kind of an extra special show for me. I'm just glad that we get to do this, and just to keep it like as normal as possible between me and Dad. I'm going to call him Dad through the episode. So I'm not going to call him Scott. He's my dad, and that's who's interviewing. So that's who I'm talking about. So, Dad, welcome to the Storyfield podcast.
Thank you.
So I'm
Hey,
going to
wait,
do a
real
little,
quick. I
yeah,
think I should be able to call him dad as well.
I
I
think
mean,
so. That'll be fun.
it's been
too.
10 years and he makes fun of me all the time. So,
Well,
Yeah,
there's
okay.
there'll be some real questions about heredity if you do that.
Yeah.
okay, I'll just
So,
stick with Mr. Allen.
okay, here's the deal. So let me give just a little bit of bio on Dad. So, he is the founder of our law firm, the Allen Firm PC, and it's a general practice firm that guides people involved in legal situations. And really, the cool part is that the firm has been doing that as of next June for 50 years. So as of now, the firm has two locations, one in the Stephenville and one in Toledo. It has 18 team members, and three of which are independent of counsel attorneys. So we've been here a while, Dad. And then, as well as being a 50-year attorney, he's been a lifelong businessman and has been involved in helping form and create several banks, real estate, investment business and holding company, involved in owning and operating a title company, and really has become lately really a pretty good rancher, right, Dad?
You bet.
Yeah. So, and
Well,
really, yeah, go ahead, Dad.
my cows don't talk back.
Yeah. And, he's a husband for over 50 years to one of the world's greatest women. My mom, and the father of three sons, the middle one of which is probably one of the coolest of the other two, and has 10 amazing grandkids. So, all right, did that sum it up?
I'll agree with the 10 great amazing grandkids.
Okay. So, well, let's get into it. So, um, we kind of want to build out a little bit of a timeline because what I know, a lot of people don't know. So, would you start that kind of around childhood and growing up in Stephenville, and just really what that was like? I mean, just kind of take us to your childhood, and let's kind of build out a timeline.
Well, we moved to Stephenville from Eastland. My father was a Perry Brothers variety store manager, and he later became a regional manager, etc. But we moved from Eastland to Stephenville, and prior to that, we lived in Mineral Wells. So I moved to Stephenville in the fifth grade and attended all the public schools till graduation, where I went to Texas Tech and then on to law school.
Mm.
Growing up in Stephenville was, at a time when I grew up, was different than it is now. Uh, I was I was a person who had to work in the garden for the family vegetable garden. The town had brick street all around the square. It was all open, and that was the end of the drag, which started at the Dairy Queen. So the entertainment in high school was to drive up and down from between the Dairy Queen and the courthouse square and see who all you could wave at. It was a different time, and
How
it
many
was a
how
good
many
time.
people, Dad, do you think were the population of the town back then?
It was probably 6,000 or 7,000, relatively small. It's grown
Yeah.
quite a bit.
And I knew you grew up in the house just right on the corner, kind of on the corner of Dale Street and Fry for Stephenville people, and was I remember you mentioned one time, was that kind of the edge of town?
Yeah, the mother and dad bought a house. It was a brick house that had been just built, and it was the only house out there. So I would go out in the backyard, hit golf balls. And now it's a road. You couldn't do that without hitting several houses.
Yeah, that's a whole neighborhood and school back there now. I mean, all
There-
Gilbert's all back there as well.
Yeah, there was a woods basically between my house and about a half a mile down the road. Eventually, they built a Chamberlain Elementary School, and then all the houses filled in. So it's been quite a development.
Hmm.
Tarleton Stadium was just down the road, and it was very small, didn't have very many stands in it. Of course, now it's got huge stands for the stadium. So there was a lot of change. I remember we used to take water balloons on the drag and see who we could throw them at. And one time we crossed the railroad tracks and hit a police car. And that was interesting because a few years later, my son, who's interviewing me, also did the same thing.
It's generational.
I went down to the police station that night. He sure had a long look on his face.
Yeah, I don't remember that night as being really one of my favorite nights in my life. So your father Van and mother Helen? A lot of people who've grown up around Stephenville knew Helen and Van as well, but what were they like?
Well, my dad was he was a minister. He was actually a variety store manager here, and then became regional manager. But he also was a country preacher. He at one time we were traveling every Sunday between 3 country churches, and he would have a sermon at each one on alternating Sundays. One Sunday night, I went with him, and we were kind of cutting up in the wooden pews. So I'll never forget, he was preaching a real strong message, and then he pointed his finger right at me and said, "Scott, if you don't straighten up, I'm coming out there and get you right now."
From
That brought
from the pulpit.
that brought silence to the whole audience and to me.
Were those churches I mean, I know we've done some family reunion type stuff out in Palapino. Was one of them out in that area?
One of them was Mount Zion, yes, over at Patilla community.
I mean, Patilla, yeah.
One of them was in Gordon. There was another one near Weatherford.
Mm.
And there was
He
some
a sub in type of guy, like he would just sub in whenever.
No, they just had service when he came. So they would not have service some Sundays. And none of them could afford a full-time preacher, so he did a good job.
How about my grandmother?
Your grandmother was a little different personality. She grew up on a 75-acre or 80-acre farm with no refrigerator. There was just a well for water. Her mother cooked on a wood stove, and they had a smokehouse where they would keep a smoke going to keep the bugs off of the hogs they would butcher. So they supported, it was the family had about 75, 80 acres, and they raised all their own food, and there were 9 kids. So there were lots and lots of kids living off that land, and my grandfather raised cattle and peanuts and cotton. But that was an interesting time. I remember my grandmother would certainly cook good biscuits on that wood-burning stove. And she did that. She raised 9 kids doing that. But mother grew up it was really competitive because there were 9 kids in that family that didn't have much. And I remember one of her stories to me was she was in high school. The home economics department was going to have a dress sewing contest, and everybody was going to make a dress, but she couldn't afford to get the material for the dress. And so she had to not sew a dress because of that reason. They just didn't have the money. And I think that period of time in her life kind of shaped her to make her mind up that she wasn't going to be in poverty her whole life. And she didn't end up that way.
That's like homesteading before homesteading was like cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I
Um,
can imagine taking care of 9 kids off
On the
of
land.
off a little land, off of some land and a farm. That's pretty impressive.
it was tight. Later on, she started a business, and I think it was probably in response to her poverty as a youth. But she started a small nursing home on Washington Street down here in the old part of town, and eventually it grew, and then later on she built another one. So she had 2 big nursing homes in Stephenville. She loved old people. She loved to tease them. She loved to play with them. She loved to be around them and just help them.
Mhm.
So she had a really good heart in regard to taking care of elderly.
Mhm. And even I'll speak to that. I think she even had a really great heart for just even the people working with the nursing homes and just helping out and some of the people who were kind of down and out in a lot of ways. So
Yeah, and her personality was very straight and direct. She hadn't learned a lot of tact, so she just told you what was on her mind. And so people either liked her or they didn't like her, and they both sides felt pretty strong about it. She was pretty tough, but she would stand up. She took care of business, and her business really, as a nursing home administrator, really developed. And then later on, she started an antique store and a florist store. She and my father operated those 2 stores in addition to the nursing homes while I was growing up.
mm, she's quite the entrepreneur, really, as far as businesses were concerned. During that time.
She was, and eventually they got a farm together, and then started raising a few cattle. So I had a variety of jobs to do, taking care of various things in that business. Uh, I remember one day I had to take the slop from the nursing home to the farm in the back of a pickup to feed the hogs. And I wasn't quite big enough to push the barrel over, but I eventually got it over and slipped on the slop in the back of the pickup, fell down where the hogs were, and then the rest of the slop poured out on my head.
That'll be something you'll never forget.
I didn't forget it to this day.
Where that you then swarmed by all the hogs and everything.
They thought I was one of them.
So where do you fit in, for those who may not know about your brothers and sisters? So where are you at in the, with siblings in the birth order?
I'm the middle child. I've got a younger brother and an older sister.
Okay. And both are around town, and many people know, both my Aunt Sherry and then Uncle Brad. So
Yeah, that's great. Brad has a business here in town, and Sherry's lived here for several years too.
yeah. Well, what made you? So let's fast forward to Texas Tech and college there. So what made you decide to go to Tech?
Well, I was asking myself that same question. I don't know, other than some of the classmates I had were going out there, and so I would know some people. So I think it was ordinary, kind of a decision made with classmates. We went out there, and several of us went, and I was sort of following the crowd, I think.
You see, Micah, so you're giving me a hard time on all these episodes about University of Texas, which we'll get to. But that's why we went up to Tech. We're just
You just
friendly
ruined it.
We're
I was
friendly.
waiting.
We're friendly people.
I've been waiting for that. I was going to drop that bomb of, why did you go to the better university second?
Okay, we'll get to that in a
Okay.
second. So how many people, Dad, do you remember as far as like what was that a really small college at the time? What
Tech
was your
was,
experience like?
it was about 6,500 to 7,500 students, fairly small, but still big enough to have a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, that may be
And
like Tarleton's campus right now.
well,
Yeah, there may be even more now than Tarleton. Huh?
Tarleton's probably actually a little bit bigger than Tech was when I went out there.
Hmm.
But of course, Tech's is huge now, and of course, Tarleton is too at this point. But I got there and got involved in several organizations. I pledged a fraternity in Sigma Chi, and I participated in student government, ran for office, got in saddle tramps. So there were a lot of activities out there that I started joining, and it was a fun few years.
Were you always civic minded like that as far as kind of getting involved in all the organizations? Or is something that's kind of developed out there?
Well, I just enjoyed meeting people, and I don't know why particularly I enjoyed those organizations. I later on ran for student body chairman of the Senate and got elected with the help of some good friends, and got to know a lot of people at the Tech campus. I made my mind up in running for that office that I never was going to run for office again, and I haven't.
That was a good experience.
we had a student affairs dean whose name was Allen, and my campaign slogan was "Yes, Scott, not Dean Allen," for student government. So they got me elected, I think.
So go ahead, Dad.
Later on, I was working towards a BBA in banking. Was a finance major, but had banking option. Went to the School of Business, and just was active on the campus, enjoying the years I was there. Met my wife Jenny. Asked her to get dropped and go with me steadily, and she refused. So I just backed off. Later on, we reconnected. I'll tell you in a minute. But I was not knowing what I was going to do. My senior year, at the beginning of my senior year, I had an uncle named Bob Wilson, who was a PhD. He taught at Louisiana State. But he came in one day, and I saw him. He asked me what I was going to do next year. Well, I think that was the first thought I'd ever had about the future.
And you were a senior in college at the time?
I was a senior in college, and I thought, I don't have an answer for him because I don't have any idea what I'm going to do. That kind of prompted me to start thinking about where I was going to be after graduation. And so I had a room, I had a friend that was going to go to UT Business School, Don Foster, a good fraternity brother and a friend. We'd known each other well. And he says, I'm going to Austin. Why don't you come be my roommate? He said, you could go to business school or law school. And so I thought, well, I guess going to law school would be good as anything. So I went to Austin to go to law school and be his roommate.
Oh my goodness.
And that was the substantive basis for my legal career decision.
That is awesome.
I know, but I love the story. I mean, of how God guides stuff, and even that decision, how it could impact so many people. I mean, it might have been a pretty seemingly not thought out decision, but it still has impacted so many people in lives, including mine, because I just went to school because I was going to be a lawyer as well. So I'm glad to hear that.
I got a question about Tech. What is a saddle? What'd you say? Saddle tramp?
Tramp. Saddle Tramp is the spirit organization, the guys that wear the red shirts at the football games.
Oh.
And they're basically a spirit organization.
Man, all this cool stuff I never knew.
I
Mr.
know.
Allen.
Gotta
I
be
think I think
careful.
I think they have something like Cowboys or something like that at UT that may be somewhat of a similar organization. Probably not quite as good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Austin, so moving to Austin like with a friend, I mean, you applied and was the law school pretty small back then?
Not really. It was a pretty good sized law school. It was definitely a good law school.
Yeah.
I was just fortunate to get in with both with my resume from Tech and high school, and then did enough on the LSAT test to get admitted. And so I was off to be a lawyer, um, and room with my friend Dodd Foster.
And he was in business school though, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, he got a master's and then left, and I was still in law school. The thing that was so shocking to me in law school was the Socratic method of teaching. And there were no answers ever given by a professor. They simply asked questions, there was discussion, and no answer. And you would go to class after class, and that's the procedure that was used. Of course, you were given textbooks, but I had never experienced any method of teaching in that regard. And it was very interesting. And it was very frustrating. Never leave the class with an answer.
You had some pretty high powered teachers too, if I remember. I know a lot of the guys that even I studied textbook wise, and some of those guys like was Johannesson down there? For lawyers who
Yeah.
are listening, wasn't he down there?
Yes, Johansson was a Wilson Estates teacher. I had his class, and Paige Keaton was a big torts teacher. Wrote some books on personal injury and that type of thing. He was the dean of the school, and I, of course, took his class. We had some excellent teachers, but they were not easy.
Oh no way.
It was
These were the
hard.
textbooks guys that we knew of.
Yeah, it was a hard and competitive place. The competition was strong. And in the meantime, while I was going to law school, well, it was the time when the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society, uh, were revolting. It was a time when the Black Panthers and the Civil Rights Movement was real active. And so there were a lot of rallies and things. I think Martin Luther King came down there one time. There were just a lot of rallies and things at UT that you could attend. An experience for a country boy was quite intense.
Oh yeah.
The Vietnam War was going on during that period of time in the latter part of the school year that I was in law school. And they had the draft lottery. And of course, everybody was worried about the draft lottery because if your number was chosen, you were gone.
So how did that work, Dad? Was that every like week they would publicize a number?
Just once a year.
Okay.
I think that was just once a year, but you went on TV and you turned on the TV and you watched to see what number was drawn first, second, etc. through the year. Mine came up number 10. And so I was married at the time and I was gone except for turning 26 4 days before December the 10th when they had the lottery. So I had just escaped it by going to Vietnam by 4 days.
Wow.
Which seemed like sort of a victory to me at the time.
Wow. Were you married in law school?
I was married the second year of law school. We married in June of '68. And Jenny and I had got, the girl who wouldn't accept my drop, got back together because her roommate called me and was real friendly. And I never talked to this girl very much at all, but she called me real friendly, wanted to talk. And so then she mentioned during the conversations that she was sure that Jenny would like to see me again. And so I got the hint and called her, and then eventually we married.
Wow.
while I was still.
Micah, we might have to do an addition and get mom on here and let her just make sure we hear the full story. Don't you
Yeah,
think?
tell her side of the story.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, Dad. Well, in law school, there was a few kind of active governmental and political people in your class, wasn't there?
There were several. Two of the better known, I guess, would be Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. She was in my class, and Ken Hance, who served as several offices in the state, was in my class, and there were several others too.
Hmm.
So it was the law school was quite an experience. I was ready to get out when it came time.
So after graduation, y'all were married. Where did you first start practicing law? Like, where'd you go after that?
Well, at the time we were living in Austin, my wife and I started sending resumes to everybody we could think of to get a job, because jobs were scarce in law offices. So I got a job up in McKinney, Texas. And so we rented a 4x8 trailer, and we had everything we owned in that trailer. And we drove it to McKinney, Texas for our first job. My wife got a job teaching in the Plano School District. She was teaching in Austin at the time, but she got a job up in McKinney. And then we moved to a law firm called Abernathy and Orr. I was the third lawyer there. There were two owners and myself, and their practice had grown some. So we stayed there, made good friends, still have friends there. And we had, I had my first and second jury trial.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So how long were you practicing at the time before you got thrown into the courtroom?
I would say about a year, maybe a year and a half. These were not magnificent cases. We were attorneys for the city of Allen, Texas, and I was the prosecuting attorney in the municipal court. And so the first jury trial was against an attorney named John Crawford. John later on became the judge on the Court of Appeals, and then became the Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals.
Wow.
But he was 4 or 5 years older than I was, so we had a traffic ticket jury trial. And we tried that case for half a day, and John beat me. He won. But we had another case that afternoon on another ticket, and I beat him. So
was it a jury? Both of them were juries?
Both of them were juries. It was split decision. We later on became good friends, but I didn't win my first one, but I did get him on the second one.
So was that where you kind of, we're pretty green coming out of law school, the lawyers are. Is that where you kind of worked out your green years?
Yeah, I was there 2.5 years, but my dad had some health issues, and he and mother were here in town in Stephenville. And so I talked to her, and his health issues were pretty bad. So we decided, my wife and I decided it was time to come back here and help mother, see if I could help dad some. So we gave notice up in McKinney and moved back to Stephenville, primarily because dad was having heart issues, had heart surgery, and mother needed support and help. That was the motivation to move back. Plus, I'd been there 2.5 years, and I thought it was time to probably get out on my own, because I had always been told by my mother that if you don't work for anyone else, you'll never get fired. And she was right. So we came back and started a law office here in Stephenville.
And that's where, for those who know our name and logo, the Allen Firm 1972, the TAF 72. So that was in 72 June when you opened up a shop.
That's correct. I was one block off the square, and it had one entrance room and a little bit of small office, but it was priced right.
Yeah,
And
was there any other lawyers in town? Like what was the, what
there,
was the legal community like around at that time?
there were other lawyers in town, and of course, Jenny, my wife, was my first secretary, and she stayed with me for a while, patiently enduring. Uh, the other lawyers in town most of them were somewhat older, very experienced. Sam Cleveland, Sam Russell, who was a representative, had just stopped practicing. Sam Cleveland was DA. Macmillan was a very wise, good trial lawyer, but older. And they had they, I don't think they associated with each other a lot, but they had respect for each other. I got to know several of them. And then there was a lawyer named Don Cohen, who was a younger guy. He was probably 5, 6 years older than I was, and he'd been here 7 or 8 years, uh, working billing practice. So he came to me one day and wanted to know if I would like to be a partner with him. And so we joined up for about 4.5, 5 years, and we were partners. We practiced a little different style and a little different emotional level, but we were friends, and we stayed together, and for that length of time, and both of us were pretty independent. And we had a client, which was the Farmers First National Bank. The president over there was named Perry Elliott. My friend, attorney Don Cohen, was on the board of directors of the bank. And there was a group of people in town. We were doing work for the bank. I was doing quite a bit of work for the bank. A group in town going to form another bank because the Stephen was growing. And they came to me and wanted me to join them. So I started working with them a little bit. And it wasn't too long after that the president of the Farmers Bank told my partner that I needed to get away from that group, that I needed not associate or work with them in any way, or we might not have the bank's business anymore. Well, the bank, Farmers Bank, was the main business in town, main bank in town. So I don't know why, but that I decided after struggling with that a while that you can never let a client control your decisions. That if you do, they'll control every decision that you make in handling a case or a matter, and really they lose respect for you. And so I decided that it was time for me to part ways with my partner Don Cohen, and open up again on my own. I formed Scott D. Allen PC and moved out next door, and we divided books and tablets and pencils. And I was next door to where he was. And then I helped in the formation of the Town and Country Bank that is now Interbank.
Yeah, and those were some of the bigger banks in town. I mean, what was the Farmers Bank at the time, and and the Town and Country Bank. Well, was that did you and Cohen partner up pretty quickly after you got into town, or was that after you practiced a couple of years?
No, it was less than a year.
Oh, okay.
I've been here. It was a little bit less than a year when I teamed up with him for 4 or 5 years.
So, how did you guys get business in? when you're first starting and when you're, I mean, how did you generate business?
But I had been gone for several years, and so I mean, I just like to be around people, and so I joined several civic organizations. There was a JC chapter here. I joined and became an officer. There was um, the Optimist Club. I later on joined them. There were some dinner clubs. I was president of the Cancer Society. Just actively, civically, uh, because I enjoyed meeting people, and I was asked to join some, so I did. And that's how I met a lot of people. And then, of course, over a period of time, you develop clients who are repeat business.
Just based on really the work you're doing and the relationships, just meeting people.
Yes.
Mm. Well, what was it like, Dad? Just kind of give us a feel for practicing law. I mean, we'll kind of say before internet. I remember as a kid growing up and coming in and just seeing kind of the copy paper and some of this stuff. But what was it like, without the internet? And how's it changed? Just kind of speak on some of this.
Well, there was a lot of carbon paper. Those were the sheets of paper we'd have the original on top and about 4 carbons behind it. And every time you made a mistake typing, or the secretary did, she had to turn pages and erase 4 different copies. And if you had a bunch of copies, and you generally did, you'd have 3 to 5, it would take a while. There was no correcting tape. There was no backspacing to get rid of an issue. We had the library wasn't a database as we have now. The library was books that you purchased and owned, and that was part of the expense of getting in a legal business. So you did your research in hard books, and sometimes you would borrow some from another lawyer and follow up. So you didn't have near the resources of libraries available as you do now on the internet and other databases. I remember when Xerox invented the copier and started making the copier available. That was a big deal in the legal profession because we did away with the carbon copies.
Oh, I bet that was enormous.
And so we'd type one original and get it like we wanted to, then copy it on the Xerox. And then later, AT&T invented the memory typewriter, which had 50 spaces so you could store 50 forms. Those were big deals and time savers.
How did just the way law was practiced, just kind of hearing some stories and being around, it seems like you guys were able to get to court a lot faster. I don't know if that's true or not, but do you have the sense that that's kind of the case?
Well, I think you did get to court faster. It was more of an open court session. Today, we have lots of rules and regulations that try to govern every aspect of the conduct of the lawyer. Back then, it was kind of kick in the door, take your witnesses, and do what you could do. And there was a lot more advocacy, unrestricted advocacy back then. So it did get to the courthouse quicker.
You got a lot of trial experience that way as well, right?
Yeah, and I did get a lot of trial experience doing that, but there are some downsides to it, and there are some improvements in today's system in that you have a lot more. There's not trial by ambush as much. You're required to disclose more of the essential facts and the evidence before trial. So it eliminated a lot of the advocacy and trial by ambush matters that went on quite a bit back then.
And were letters like typed in mail? So did you feel as much pressure as far as responding in response time?
Well, I don't think the discovery rules were quite as tight on responding. You did have deadlines. that you had to meet, but not 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 near as many deadlines as there is today in practicing law.
Yeah. And I guess my question was more also kind of geared toward like just the actual writing of letters and sending them out by mail instead of just a quick email back with another letter.
Yeah, it would. You'd have to write a letter and send it. It would take 2 or 3 days to get delivered. Time they prepared a response and send it back, it'd be 2 or 3 more days. So that's quite a distance from what we have now. If you could just email somebody and get a quick response in 10 minutes. It would take us 5 or 6 days to get a response from somebody, like if I had a case in Fort Worth and we were dealing with a Fort Worth lawyer. Of course, you could phone, but a lot of things you need to put in writing.
Yeah.
So it's quicker today. It was a lot slower practice then in terms of mail.
So you've been practicing, Dad, for, right at 50 years or right around or over 50 years. What's did you have some just general advice that you would give a person that you really have learned over the years of practice?
Well, yeah, I guess to a general person, a client, or somebody just personal conversation, I would probably tell them that anytime there's a divorce or a death or another extremely emotional event, to delay the decision process on major decisions for at least a year to 18 months. Because people they're not able to recover. They think they're thinking straight and they think that they understand what they want to do, but after major decisions from like a divorce, separation, or a death, they need to wait. They don't need to make major decisions. Just be steady for a year or 18 months. You'll make a better decision and you'll stay with the decision a lot better, because a lot of times people do it early. They might remarry in a panic, or they might make some, sell all their real estate or something they own. They don't need to do that after an emotional major decision has occurred in their life. So that's one thing I would tell people: slow down on major decisions after death or divorce or other emotional event. And I think probably the worst fights between people in today's society is family fights. They are emotional, and they are types of thought processes that run through the family mind that aren't clear thinking. The emotion creeps into every decision they make. And so I would say to them, do everything you can to avoid a family fuss or fight. I have, right at this moment, I have 3 or 4 cases where families are involved in disputes. And sometimes it's just motivated by just anger at the other side. And
Yeah, there's
those,
no real win. There's no real win.
nobody wins. And then you terminated a relationship forever. And that's, with your family, that's something you don't need to do.
Yeah, that's really good, Dad. What else? Those are two incredibly helpful. I mean, and maybe we ask it this way too, like, how has really something you learned as a lawyer just helped you in life? Because you've been in the middle of all those family fights and those quick decisions and the disputes, and you've seen all these situations. There's something you just learned as a lawyer just really helped you in life, and that's another way to answer that, I suppose.
Well, emotions drive a lot of decisions. And if you can wait to a time until you not have the high emotional level, you'll make better decisions. So I think that's one thing I've learned. Also learned to try to be patient.
Mm.
You can have situations happen that are both funny and sad. we were trying somewhat of a family fight one time over in the courtroom, and there was the district judge was Judge Herman Fitz, and he always had this stump of a cigar. He chewed on it. He didn't smoke it. He just chewed on it when he was sitting on the bench. And Bob Glasgow and I were trying this case, and he had objected to a statement I had said. Well, the judge, Judge Fitz, when he got mad, he would swirl around in his chair. He'd put his feet up on the desk and look up in the air with a stub in his mouth of that chewy cigar. So when he did that, he was mad at us this time. And when he swung around, he put his feet up in the air, had that cigar in his mouth, and he leaned back and went all the way over.
Oh, no.
The whole courtroom was stunned. And the first thing I saw after he was able to kind of crawl to his feet was his head came above the desk. And he said, "Objection overruled."
Really?
Crawl back in his chair, and the trial resumed.
Well, he handled that pretty well, it sounds like. Well, what are some things you think you've seen, or what are some things that you've seen people do that gets them into the most trouble? Is there anything that just like is pretty clear? You know, this gets you in trouble pretty quick, and I've seen it just on repeat.
Well, I've seen one thing in the States. After parents die and the kids are involved and they're trying to get everything together and divide it up, one of the worst mistakes they make is one child lays claim to some property. That's the absolute worst thing they can do. Say, Dad and Mother wanted me to have that, and even though y'all weren't present, they gave it to me. That causes more problems, more family problems with estates than anything. Don't lay claim to any property when your parents died. Do what the wills and the estate laws provide, because if you start laying claim, then everybody else starts to lay claim, and then before long you got a lawsuit. So that's a very unwise thing to do.
Yeah, that's good. Dad, speak on, you mentioned a time or two in the past, or just something I think you've mentioned to me. You've seen quite a bit of people risk too much. You know, when they get a certain level of wealth or income or success, then you've seen them risk too much and really can turn around and go bad on them. Talk on that for a minute.
That's a little bit of a growing greed problem. You know, a guy starts out, he acquires a property, he sells it, he makes some money, or he acquires a business, is successful. So he sees that success. He might do it 2 or 3 times. But then as he's successful, everything he does has been successful, he gets to the point where he doesn't think he can fail. So he'll make a major decision with lots of financing involved, and the business doesn't succeed. So he succeeds only in losing everything he's acquired. He's trying to grow too quick, too fast, without developing the other businesses to the level they need to be at, and to carefully analyze future investments. That's a problem for people who have been successful in 2 or 3 investments, and they're coming upon bigger and major ones, and they forget they're not guaranteed success.
Yeah, or maybe successful too quickly.
And some of that's driven by greed, you know, so that you need to be careful, especially as you get 40s, 50s, that stage in your life.
Yeah. Well, let's talk to some lawyers for a second, and even young lawyers. What advice would you give a young lawyer who's starting out?
Well, you got to develop a relationship of trust with your clients, and then never breach it. Your clients have to fully trust you, but you can't let them control you. If they control you, you've lost.
Yeah, you're not independent anymore.
Right. And you've got to maintain independence to give good advice and to help them. You know, the job of a lawyer is to solve problems in people's lives. That's your job. Your job is not to let your emotions get involved. Your job is not to build a problem bigger than it exists or that it is. It's to solve the problem for the client. If a person comes to you and they're unreasonable, they have an unreasonable position, and they won't listen to your advice, you need to fire them. Because if they maintain that posture, you can't win in their opinion. And if you can't win in their opinion, then before too long, you're the reason they didn't win. So if they just maintain unreasonable positions, you don't need to keep representing them.
Yeah.
Your job, one of the pleasures of this profession is making unreasonable people act reasonably, because there are a lot of unreasonable people and emotional people act reasonably. And that's one of the things you can do for your client. For a young lawyer, I would say, I prepare your adversary with investigation, witnesses, and research before you go to trial, and you just need to work at that. It's not, but just a little bit easier to do a good job than it is to do a reasonable job. And it doesn't take that much time to do a good job as opposed to just a reasonable job. So you need to try to do a good job for your clients.
Yeah, so those young lawyers can really level the playing field a little bit just by over preparing.
That's correct. That is correct. And old lawyers fear that too. You need to keep your emotions out of it. Some lawyers get emotionally involved in a client and they lose perspective of what their role is. Some lawyers, I call them, they take on the role of big, bad, tough lawyers, when in fact it's just a need they have emotionally to act big and strong and mean. You don't have to be big and strong and mean and an antagonist to be a good lawyer. You just need to be determined.
Yeah, that's good, Dad. You mentioned keeping the emotions out of it, and I've seen hundreds of situations with you when people come in groups that are in conflict, and just the fact that you've been able to stay just calm and at peace throughout it has just helped defuse many bombs over and over and over.
Well, your job is to offer options to people to resolve problems that they haven't either thought of or haven't thought of approaching the solution in that matter. And if you offer those options, they have an out they hadn't thought of that helps them. And our job is after
Yeah.
all, our job is to help people.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the non-negotiable type of qualities you've wanted to have in the firm and in your employees all these years? Because you've built a culture. What are some of those non-negotiables that you've always looked for?
Well, first, I've had very good people working with me and for me, and so it's not just me. But I think it's very, as I told you earlier, I think it's very important the client does not control or run the case. The lawyer does. And so the lawyer makes the client be reasonable. If they refuse, you fire them. If they don't refuse and they listen to options and they're rational people, they'll have a good solution. But you offer options. You're making unreasonable people be reasonable. Lawyer needs to do that with his own client. I get a great deal of pleasure out of having now at this stage of my life representing 3 generations. I've represented, the parents and their kids and now grandkids. And so it's pleasing to me to be able to say I've had clients that long in the same family. And I think that's one of the pleasures of practicing law.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my questions too. Just what are some of the others, your favorite parts? What have you enjoyed about the practice? And I know that's one of them, just all the relationships in the families.
What I think I enjoy most of all is making unreasonable people be reasonable.
Yeah.
I think I've enjoyed facing new situations each day and the problems that life brings for people, and then helping them solve it if I can.
Yeah, there's never a dull moment.
No, and each day is different, and each problem's different too. And that happens. You see, 5 or 6 people a day. They all have different issues, and you get to deal with many issues that help. And if you can help them, in the easier way, that's the way you need to go. If it has to get tough, well, you seem to be determined to get tough with them.
Yeah. For kind of new lawyers, even any lawyers listening to this, like what would you say is one of the more difficult parts of practicing?
I think dealing with the attorney on the opposite side that has either his ego or his emotions have built to a level where they lose reason and they lose sight of their real purpose in representing clients. They lose all sides of what should be done in view of I want my way or the highway. And so that's a bit frustrating dealing with emotional or self-indulgent lawyers whose ego has grown. And in recent years, that's been an issue, but I'm seeing a little bit less of that nowadays than I used to.
Yeah, that's good. And people coming alongside and knowing we can still be adversaries and represent well each side, but we're also not going to make worse problems for the clients.
Yeah, you have a trial and you advocate for your client, so does the other side. The clients never understand how you could just forget that and go have a cup of coffee with them, the other attorney. And it's quite easy if you maintain a relationship where you're honest, you're ethical, and you have acted fairly but are strongly advocating for your client. You just let it go at the courthouse and go have coffee.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I think I could probably just keep asking you questions all day. Tell me, we're going to have to wind it up real soon, but tell me, was there any situation, kind of one of the crazier situations you've ever seen practicing come to mind?
Well, of course, Judge Fitz's episode in Fall in the Courtroom was interesting. I've had a guy here. I was after him to pay a pretty good sized bill that he owed, and this guy was a little bit emotional. The rumor was that he had shot at an airplane with his rifle, and he had that reputation. So I was sitting in the office one day, and he comes in the front door, past the receptionist without asking if I was in or what. And I had some clients I was talking to. So he walks into the room with my clients that were talking about something, and he's real hot and mad. And he says, you're wanting to collect this debt. He says, I don't have the money to pay you right now. He says, I don't know where you're ever going to get it, but if you take everything I got, you might as well have the shirt. So he pulls his shirt off in front of my clients in the office, and he gives it to me. He says, now you have the shirt off my back.
Oh my goodness.
and then walks out. I took that shirt, had it cleaned, and folded and framed. So I put it on.
That's funny.
So people give us a bad reputation sometime, but maybe it's not always us taking the shirt off their back. They're doing it themselves.
So you're talking about people being emotional. Mr. Allen, what was your emotions when you first saw me in the little office working? Because I think at that time I had colored hair and just a few tattoos.
Michael, I've had some ups and downs with your tattoos and your colored hair, but I've got to know you better, and I trust you.
Well, that's awesome. I could tell by the Christmas gifts of pickled pig's feet that I was in your warm spot.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up, Dad. I've seen you help just thousands and thousands of people, and we have an incredible client base, incredible group of people working with us, and just a great culture as a firm. And that's all coming from what you've done in your heart and the people we've had around and how you've helped people. But do you have like an encouragement to people, or just kind of like what you would say a life message? And that's a hard question, but would you say, like, here's some encouragement, here's a bit of a message for you?
Well, it's probably a bit of a standard answer, Josh, but I think if I were going to give some advice, I would tell them that the real answer to life's problems is found in Christ.
Yeah.
And that he will guide you and help you and assist you, and is the real solution to all problems.
Yeah. That's great, Dad. And that's how we run the practice, and that's what we try to do for people, and that comes from your heart, and that's the answer. And we've helped a lot of people in the process, and I appreciate you taking the time and making the time to like help get that story and help us, and then just kind of to wrap the final circle up, I was able to be blessed to jump in, come back to town, I guess close to 17 years ago. And you'd already changed the firm from Scott D. Allen PC to the Allen firm, kind of just having that vision and knowing that. And now we have, a great group of attorneys around and great group of people. So the story continues. So, well, thanks, Dad. Thanks for making time. Michael, you have anything else?
No, I'm just, I mean, the whole point of this podcast is to hear the story behind things and why people do stuff. So it's no wonder that the firm's been around for 50 years. It has a great reputation of giving back and being honorable and really just loving on people. And then like Scott's last answer right there about, everything's found through Jesus, and that's all Jesus wanted us to do, is to love people where they're at. So
yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dad.
You bet. Thank you.
Great to have you on. I appreciate you making time.
You're welcome.
Hey, this is Micah. Me and Josh would like to thank you for joining us in the Storyfield today. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and to learn more about us and the Storyfield, visit thestoryfield.com. This podcast is sponsored by the Allen Firm, legal guides for many of life's situations. To learn more about the Allen Firm, visit allenlawfirm.com. Have a blessed day, week, and year, and we will see you next time on the Storyfield.
This is Josh again. I just wanted to thank you for listening and let you know that this podcast is really about hope and about giving you hope for your life. So if you're listening and you're in a place where you're really feeling hopeless right now, or if you do not know Jesus, we have some great news to share with you and would love a chance to pray for you. Email us at hope@allenlawfirm.com. That's hope@allenlawfirm.com, and we'll reach out to you soon. Thank you for listening. God bless you.